Hello there. Welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. I'm John Barron.
Hey, I'm Licciardello.
So, is Donald Trump reshaping the Middle East by vowing to take over Gaza, or reshaping the narrative as he slashes the federal government and Elon Musk takes over America?
We're going to be speaking to a Middle East expert and one of the former chiefs of the USAid agency, who also headed America's global fight against COVID. But first,
President Trump's announcement that he wanted America to take over and rebuild Gaza this week, sending Palestinians to live out their lives somewhere else like Egypt or Jordan, has been met with a mix of shock, alarm and ridicule. Here's what the president said after meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it to do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
So that's Trump's big idea. The Palestinian representative to the United Nations suggested that if Trump wants to send Gazans somewhere, how about letting them go back to their homes in what is now Israel?
For those who want to send them to a happy, nice place, let them go back, to their original homes inside Israel. There are nice places there, and they will be happy to return to these places.
Meanwhile, fair to say there was a mixed reaction back in Washington, D.C.?
This is about, I think, for me, I didn't take it as like a serious situation, and it's just about shaking things up. But I'm not going to freak out on it.
It's a bold move, certainly. Far bolder than what's been done before.
This is an extraordinarily dangerous approach for the president to take and not consistent with American values.
There's taking over Gaza, there's helping rebuild Gaza. Probably need some clarification on what exactly that means.
It's probably safe to say the international reaction probably wasn't what President Trump had hoped for either. A senior Hamas figure, Abu Zuri, calling it ridiculous and absurd. It was strongly rejected by Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. The Saudis aren't having a bar of it either, rejecting any attempts to displace the Palestinians from their land, describing this stance as clear and explicit as well as not negotiable. Jordan also made it clear its rejection of any attempts to annex land and displace the Palestinians. So, Trump managed to do something quite extraordinary: unite much of the Middle East, including rivals like Saudi Arabia and Iran, against his plan. Meanwhile, over on Fox and Friends, they're expressing full-throated support of the president, even claiming the Palestinians would secretly like to leave Gaza.
And of course, the Palestinians, if you interview them, which many of these left organizations have, they're going to say, we don't want to leave. But they have to say that. They don't have any other options. They're landlocked. No one wants to take them right now unless President Trump comes up with a deal. And they're scared of Hamas.
Well, and so far they say they're not going to leave. And that's the problem right there.
So that's the problem right there, Steve Ducey, that the Palestinians won't leave their homes. And what was that about Gaza being landlocked? Ainsley Earhart, not the last time I had a look at a map. If it was landlocked, I don't think Trump would be calling it this.
The Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent.
So where did this all come from? According to the New York Times, Trump's announcement of a Gaza takeover, quote, shocked even senior members of his own White House and government. And while he read the plan from a sheet of paper, his administration had not even the most basic planning to examine the feasibility of the idea. So basically seems this was a bit of a back of the beer coaster piece of diplomacy, Chaz. But was it intended to be a circuit breaker, a distraction? Was it a case of the most powerful person on earth just spitballing a bit based on one of the few areas of his actual expertise, real estate development?
either way, it ain't going to happen. We can agree on that. As you said before, Egypt and Jordan, they're not going to take relocated Palestinians. In fact, foreign ministers of 5 Arab countries immediately issued a joint statement rejecting the forced displacement of Palestinians. Among those countries was Egypt and Jordan, as well as Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned, but also Qatar, UAE. Keep on going. There's a lot of countries there, John. They all said that this would threaten stability in the region, spread conflict, and undermine the prospects for peace. In fact, Sources from Jordan even told one paper that they were ready to declare war on Israel if Netanyahu forcibly expelled Palestinians into Jordan. So that there definitely does not sound very peaceful. The Palestinians, they're not going to cop being forcibly removed from yet another location. I imagine they could note that the United Nations Commission defined ethnic cleansing as, quote, rendering an area ethnically homogenous by using force or intimidation to remove the persons of given groups from the area. Now, Trump wasn't explicitly proposing force or intimidation there, but that definition wasn't too far off, was it? I'm guessing a number of Israelis would have had a problem with Trump's proposal as well. Historically, Israel has always fought its own wars with its own soldiers, even if it's been supported with America's weapons. Maybe the only people who think Trump's idea is a good one are the fictional people that Trump supposedly has been speaking to.
Everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land, developing and creating thousands of jobs with something that will be magnificent.
Even Lindsey Graham wasn't into this idea, and he's always into military involvement. He said, "We'll see what our Arab friends say about that. I think most South Carolinians would probably not be excited about sending Americans to take over Gaza. Might be problematic." Having said all that, I do understand why Trump is into this idea. He thinks like a real estate developer. Remember how he tried to reach out to North Korea in his first term?
As an example, they have great beaches. You see that whenever they're exploding their cannons into the ocean, right? So I said, boy, look at that bridge. Wouldn't that make a great condo behind? And I explained, I said, you know, instead of doing that, you could have the best hotels in the world right there. Think of it from a real estate perspective. You have South Korea, you have China, and they own the land in the middle. How bad is that, right? It's great.
History rhyming. There is a much more pressing question, though, before we worry about five-star hotels of the future. Is the second phase of the ceasefire going to happen? And who's going to be in charge of Gaza if it does? Because Trump might have just made it more likely that Hamas is going to be in charge again, because they're going to resist this scheme the loudest. You can be sure of that, John. One more thing. Trump dropped another surprise at the end of his press conference as well. He made a hint about his upcoming policy on potential Israeli annexation of the West Bank.
Do you support Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, areas which many believe is the biblical homeland of the Jewish people?
Well, we're discussing that with many of your representatives. You're represented very well, and people do like the idea, but we haven't taken a position on it yet. But we will be we'll be making an announcement probably on that very specific topic over the next 4 weeks.
Who knows what that means, John? I got no idea. But if Trump is hinting he's about to allow Israel to take the West Bank, that could have far more far-reaching implications than anything else from that press conference.
Yeah, I suspect that word salad was Trump not really wanting to say, sorry, I don't know where you're talking about biblical Samaria. I'm not convinced that he even knew what he was talking about. Today, though, the other shoe might have dropped from Bibi Netanyahu. His plan for what should happen next is that, well, we're not saying that all the Palestinians need to leave and go somewhere else. We're saying that all of Hamas needs to leave, go into exile in another place, and then we can start talking about peacekeeping forces. So maybe this has been coordinated with Trump. Maybe they're both spitballing in all of this.
Something tells me those Middle Eastern countries wouldn't be keen to take Hamas either.
Yeah, you could be right. Well, for more on all of this, we're joined by Brian Katulis. He is a senior fellow for the US Foreign Policy at the Middle East Institute. He's also worked for the National Security Council and the Departments of State and Defence for many years. Brian Katulis, welcome to Planet America.
Great to be with you.
So a lot of seasoned Middle East analysts found Trump's announcement of this Gaza plan this week simply jaw-dropping. What was your reaction?
Well, I just got off the plane from the Middle East when he did that press conference, and it was clear that he surprised not only the world, but a lot of his own staff. People had talked about notions of like this. Jared Kushner at Harvard last year talked about this, but having just come back from the Middle East where people were still abuzz about his previous statements about how all the Palestinians of Gaza should go to Egypt and Jordan. And in those discussions I had in the Gulf, people basically laughed at the guy. They didn't take him seriously because there's nothing behind it. It's similar to what he says about Greenland or Canada becoming the 51st state or Panama. People around the world actually see that there's nothing behind it. And the laughter that I heard when I was in the Middle East on the initial statements reminded me of when he was at the United Nations in 2018. And he said something and literally the whole General Assembly laughed at him. So that's the thing that's going on, is that we overanalyze something that actually isn't anything. It's not a real plan. And as we see from his team walking back many of the statements, I don't think there's much there to work with.
Brian, if Trump had made almost exactly the same Gaza offer, but instead had said, Palestinians move out for 6 months while we clean the place up and then move back in, would that have been received just as poorly? In other words, is it simply the permanent nature of the proposed US takeover that was so offensive to people?
I think it probably would have been received as poorly because that's just not practical. It ignores the difficult reality of what Gaza is today. Yes, there is a ceasefire, but it's a very tenuous ceasefire. Hamas is still there with weapons, with other criminal gangs. It's a very dangerous place if we tried to come in as outsiders and just move pieces around and not do certain things. So, and rebuilding for the Palestinians in 6 months just is not practical, because most estimates it's going to take like at least 10 years. You need a long-term game plan to clear ordnance, to clear the rubble. So again, I think a more practical discussion would have been the thing that we might see a little bit more next week when President Sisi of Egypt and King Abdullah of Jordan are in town. The Arab countries are the ones that are going to be expected to carry a lot of the burden. They have supported the Palestinians. They've been offering, especially Saudi Arabia, the UAE, some template of what reconstruction might look like, but it does not involve displacing the Palestinians. So I think the only thing Donald Trump really displaced here wasn't Palestinians. It was our debate about what's realistic and what plan could actually be implemented here.
Brian, it is often hard to tell with President Trump whether these sort of surprising, bold initiatives are just an opening gambit designed to start a discussion and a process, or whether, perhaps to use less diplomatic language, they're just a bit of a brain fart. Do you have a sense as to what this is?
I think it's mostly the latter. He's just pulling it out of thin air. I mean, certainly people have talked about things like this, but the reason why it's not terribly realistic is because if you look at the reaction it provoked, it did not provoke a debate that was like, oh, this is a good idea and we should slightly amend it. Or it didn't also say this is a bigger alternative that we would have. It basically was several days of people in the region and then here in Washington dismissing the idea. And it reminds me of certain things he did on the Middle East in his first term. If you recall, he said that we were going to take all of the oil of Iraq. It never happened. He said we were going to pull troops out of Syria. That didn't happen. He also said that in Syria, the Saudis were going to pay for the reconstruction of northeast Syria. I was in Saudi Arabia when he said that. The Saudis are like, he doesn't talk to us. And same sort of thing with this Gaza idea, is that he doesn't do the work. He has people on his team who actually are engaging the region. Steve Witkoff is Middle East envoy, but he just does these things for show. And the unfortunate thing is that it doesn't produce any movement up the field, any progress to help the Palestinians or Israelis secure themselves. And the real issue right now is whether the ceasefire moves from phase 1 to phase 2, which is quite difficult and requires more negotiation and concessions. And there was no discourse or discussion publicly about that, but a lot more private discussion about that.
Brian, in your view, did Trump just propose ethnic cleansing?
Sounds like it, but it depends on which hour of the day we're talking to the Trump team, because the Trump team walked it back and said, well, maybe the Palestinians would temporarily move. Some have just roundly condemned it as ethnic cleansing. And the way he says it, it has a tone of like, they should just leave. I used to live in Gaza. I worked in Gaza in the 1990s for a couple of years, so I stayed in touch with some of my dear friends there. And not only were the region, the leaders of the region, the Gulf states and others, laughing at Trump, but just today I was talking to a dear friend in Gaza. He lost his home and things like this. And even after all the war, they look at Trump and they just see him as a clown. They know that they're not going anywhere. No one can force them to go, and they don't want to leave. I mean, my friend joked, well, maybe if it wasn't Egypt or Jordan, maybe it was like Italy or Switzerland, we might go. But he was just joking. These are people who are committed to staying where they were born and where their families have lived for decades.
Now, at the end of Trump's presser, he flagged an announcement coming in 4 weeks about what he thinks should happen to the West Bank. So should we interpret that as a strong hint that Trump is about to let Israel annex the West Bank? And if he does do that, where does that leave the Middle East peace process?
Well, there is no peace process right now. There are discussions about maintaining these ceasefires between Israel and Hamas, Israel and Hezbollah, getting hostages home. There's some general talk about an Israel-Saudi normalization accord. And I'll tell you, if the annexation idea moves forward, 2 things will happen. One, there will be no progress towards the Israeli-Saudi normalization accord that people have talked about now here for several years. I talk to the Saudis regularly. There is no pathway towards that deal if Israel just takes more land and claims it for themselves, while there's still millions of Palestinians living there. The second thing will happen is basically Palestinians will still live there, right? It doesn't resolve the situation. It might curry favor for Trump with some of the evangelical Christians or some of the right-wing Jewish supporters in America and Israel who like this idea. But it's actually a road to nowhere for resolving the bigger picture. And the bigger thing is if Trump, a man with a big ego who still by many accounts, is angry that he did not get the Nobel Peace Prize for the 2020 Abraham Accords, when Barack Obama in 2009 got the Nobel Peace Prize simply for not being George W. Bush. If Trump truly wants that prize, that bigger prize, he's not going to be able to achieve it with an annexation of the West Bank by Israel.
Brian Katulis, thank you very much for being with us on Planet America.
Great. Good talking with you. Thank you.
While the world has been reeling this week from threats of tariffs, warning the US could retake control of the Panama Canal, make Canada its 51st state and steal Greenland away from Denmark while they're at it, Donald Trump has been swinging a wrecking ball through multiple agencies of the federal government. And that wrecking ball has a name: Elon Musk. The world's richest man has been tasked with clawing back around $2 trillion in US federal government spending. That's around 1/3 of the federal budget. Abolishing entire departments and agencies, strongly suggesting thousands of employees should basically clear out their desks and go and find work elsewhere. This week, much of the focus has been on the US Agency for International Development, USAID, which since it was founded in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy has become the major distributor of America's foreign humanitarian aid, including health programs and pandemic responses, vaccines and preparedness. Musk, who has been named now a special government employee, took to the social media site he owns to state that USAID is, quote, evil, claiming it funded bioweapons research, including COVID-19. He's calling it a criminal organisation nonetheless. Democrats, including Jamie Raskin, appeared outside the USAID headquarters after it was abruptly shuttered this week. Workers locked out, foreign aid spending frozen for 90 days, halting countless programs around the world. Raskin had this message for Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, you didn't create USAID. The United States Congress did for the American people. And just like Elon Musk did not create USAID, he doesn't have the power to destroy it. And who's going to stop him? We are. We're going to stop him.
Exactly how they plan to stop him is unclear, though. President Trump, meanwhile, says that it is the people employed by USAID who are the real problem.
The first term, though, USAID was something that you liked in some respects.
I love the concept of it.
That's the program.
Sure, I love the concept, but they turn out to be radical left lunatics. And the concept of it is good, but it's all about the people.
So Trump wants USAID rolled into the State Department and its spending slashed from its current budget of $40 billion, which currently makes it the world's largest provider of humanitarian aid, including vital famine detection and hunger relief programs. Now, $40 billion does sound like a lot of money, and indeed it is. And polls do show that foreign aid is very unpopular with American voters. They think that 25% of the federal budget is spent on overseas charity. In fact, it's around 0.5%. Well, this week, the White House issued a press release. It's headed, "At USAID, waste and abuse runs deep," and it accused the agency of giving massive sums of money to the ridiculous and in many cases malicious pet projects of entrenched bureaucrats with next to no oversight. For example, it continues, $1.5 million spent to advance diversity, equity and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and business communities. $70,000 for production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book that's in Peru. So we can see a pattern forming there. But add all that up, Chaz, it's about $4 million out of a $40 billion budget. Hardly deep waste and abuse. Several of those projects as well don't actually involve USAID, yet they're all cited by the White House as reason to get rid of the agency. And then there are claims like this one.
Think of it, $100 million on condoms to Hamas. Condoms to Hamas, and many other things that are frankly even more ridiculous.
Yes, quite ridiculous. That is a highly dubious claim, but one that has been receiving widespread coverage, understandably enough. Chaz, we'll get an expert opinion on that soon.
We are, but John, strap yourself in, okay? Because
Yeah.
I want to talk about something a little bit different. While I do have thoughts about USAID.
Puts it in context.
Yeah, exactly. We need to do this because, like we say on the show, it's a democracy. They can make their decisions about USAID themselves. Trump ran on making these kinds of cuts. People voted for him to make these kinds of cuts, and so he's going to make these kinds of cuts. That's fine. My concern is about how these cuts are happening. Let's go back a week. When a group of 8 Department of Government Efficiency officials, or DOGE as we're going to call it from now on, entered the USAID building, and they immediately demanded access to the entire place, despite only a few of them having a security clearance. When USAID officials attempted to block access to classified areas, the DOGE officials threatened to call in the marshals. And then those DOGE officials shut down the USAID website, and they told the USAID employees to not come to work. They locked thousands of those employees out of their work accounts, even those in war zones, and then they placed an enormous amount of those employees on leave. And today, we hear they're only going to retain 290 of USAID's 10,000 employees. No questions asked, they just did it. And the DOGE guys weren't just there. They also went to the Treasury building, where they took over sensitive systems that control the flow of more than $6 trillion annually to households, businesses, and more. Tens, if not hundreds of millions of people rely on these systems. They're responsible for distributing Social Security, Medicare benefits, salaries for federal personnel, payments to government contractors, grant recipients, tax refunds, amongst thousands of other functions. And when the recent acting head of the Treasury tried to stop them gain access to this very sensitive payment system that sends money out to the entire federal government, he was put on leave and then suddenly retired. Furthermore, they also headed over to the Office of Personnel Management, and they locked career civil servants out of the computer systems that contain the personal data of millions of federal employees, including birth dates, social security numbers, appraisals, home addresses, pay grades, and their service details. Quote, "We have no visibility into what they're doing with the computer and data systems," said one official. There is no oversight. It creates real cybersecurity and hacking implications. Staffers also noted that DOGE had access to the code itself, which means they could make untraceable updates to anything that they wanted in the programs. Now, you might say, great, America needs to make some cuts. This is the most efficient way to do it. Maybe it is. But this is not how you're legally allowed to make cuts in America. The Constitution is very clear. This is Congress's job, not some group of, well, who are these people? Well, Wired magazine has identified 6 young men so far, all between the ages of 19 and 24, who have little to no government experience. They're just floating around in the Elonosphere. And now, they've got complete control of all government transactions. But the truth is, we don't know who most of these people are because they're shrouded in secrecy. Elon's team has prioritised secrecy, sharing little outside the roughly 40 people involved, even to the point of refusing to say their surnames when interviewing federal workers. But hang on, you might say. They answer to the president, don't they? Elon says they do. He says he went over the USAID situation with Trump in detail and Trump agreed that they should shut it down. Musk said, and I actually checked with him a few times and said, are you sure? The answer was yes, and so we're shutting it down. Fair enough. But even if Trump himself was on the laptops making these cuts, it would still be totally illegal. Once again, the Constitution clearly states Congress has the power of the purse, not the president. What Doge should be doing is making a report for Congress. But it's not the president doing this. It's Doge. And might I remind you of the legal mechanism by which Doge was created? We talked about last week. It was with an executive order that declared that Doge shall commence a software modernization initiative to, quote, improve the quality and efficiency of government-wide software, network infrastructure, and information technology systems. And it should, quote, promote interoperability between agency networks and systems, ensure data integrity, and facilitate responsible data collection and synchronization. Does that sound like what they're actually doing? Everything they're doing is blatantly illegal and unauthorized. And remember, they were created this way to ensure that Doge would not be subject to the Freedom of Information Act, so they could keep their communications and information secret from Congress and the public, which makes this whole thing even dodgier, especially given some of these Doge guys have received full admin-level access and have already made extensive changes to the code base for the government's payment system, which could allow them to bypass security measures, possibly cause irreversible damage to these systems. They've apparently already significantly rewritten the code for these payment systems. A former privacy officer referred to this as a data breach of exponential proportions. If we lose control of that data, she said, we've lost control forever. But still, these are good kids, aren't they? They're not going to try to destroy the government. Well, maybe. We know nothing about these people. They don't even have security clearances. One of them just resigned because he's a self-described racist and eugenicist. In fact, not even Elon Musk has been confirmed for any role. None of these people have authority to do anything. And it's worth noting that the little we're seeing of Elon, he's acting very strangely. He's been tweeting at 4 a.m. with gems like, "This is the one shot the American people have to defeat bureaucracy, rule of the bureaucrats, and restore democracy, rule of the people. We're never going to get another chance like this. It's now or never. Your support is crucial to the success of the revolution of the people." That is messianic. Even more unsettling, Musk has been taking requests from nutbags on Twitter for cuts while he's making them. Mike Flynn, who is a pretty unhinged fellow at the best of times, decided that all charities with the word Lutheran in them were by definition criminal for some reason, and Musk worryingly responded to that with, "The Doge team is rapidly shutting down these illegal payments." That does not reassure me. Remember, these deletions might not be reversible or even knowable ever. So how much do you trust Musk and these randos? What happens if they make a mistake? What happens if Russia offers one of these kids $20 million to give them a backdoor entry into government payment systems? What happens if they decide to make a few payment cuts to Elon's competitors like Jeff Bezos? What if they decide to make a few extra payments to one of Elon's allies, or even to Elon himself? He's a contractor as well, you know. But don't worry, the White House has a foolproof plan to keep this process honest.
Elon Musk is currently a, quote, special government employee who also owns companies that have billions of dollars in federal contracts. You said earlier this week that he has abided by all applicable federal laws, but what steps is the Trump administration taking to address that conflict of interest?
The president was already asked and answered this question this week, and he said if Elon Musk comes across a conflict of interest with the contracts and the funding that Doge is overseeing, then Elon will excuse himself from those contracts.
Great. Elon will take care of it. What could possibly go wrong? As one professor put it, this feels like a hostile takeover of the machinery of government by the richest man in the world. John, I don't like being alarmist at all, you know that, but this is alarming.
Yeah. And it seems like we ain't seen nothing yet either, because it's not just USAID, it's probably going to be the Department of Education in the next couple of days, and one by one they're going through these departments. 2 million plus federal employees were given until today to basically clear out their desks, quit in return for getting 8 months' pay for not working. Now, a judge has put a temporary stay on that for a couple of days. But right now you'd say, well, why would a federal employee stay? Because there's every chance that next week they're going to get fired with nothing.
Yeah, I just want to know where the courts are. Like you talked about that, where the courts are with all this stuff, with all that typing stuff.
Well, they're struggling to keep up, and the lawyers and Democrats in Congress are trying to slow this down, but Republicans in Congress are just waving the whole thing through. Quite remarkable. With us now is Dr. Jeremy Konyndyk. He is the former director of the USAID Office for Foreign Disaster and Assistance. He also led the agency's multi-billion-dollar COVID-19 assistance program. He's now the president of the humanitarian organisation Refugees International. Dr. Konyndyk, welcome to Planet America.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you.
We just heard Elon Musk refer to USAID as, quote, evil, criminal. He even accused it of funding bioweapons, including COVID-19. Is any of that true?
No, almost nothing that Elon Musk has said about USAID over the last couple of weeks has been true. On the specific COVID-19 point, as with any of these lies, it's kind of hard to know exactly what he thinks he's referring to. Certainly, USAID does not. I mean, I can hardly actually say it without laughing. USAID does not fund weapons development or bioweapons development or anything like that, and it's an absurd thing to claim. And of course, there is no evidence that they have of this. I think what they are talking about is some of the work that USAID has funded over the years related to mapping out novel virus risks, which is a really critical element of understanding the global pathogen risk landscape that we face. It's actually about as close to the opposite of weapons development as you could get, because what that research does and what it enables is the development of countermeasures. So if you have an understanding of the nature and the range of viral pathogen threats that exist out in the world, then you can be developing medical countermeasures to that, vaccines and therapeutic treatments, and doing research along those lines that enables the more rapid development of tailored vaccines and tailored therapeutic treatments once a new virus reaches an epidemic level.
Musk also says, Jeremy, that USAID is a psyop and funds left-wing media organisations to spread propaganda like Politico Europe and the BBC. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, it's absolute garbage. I mean, it's just total garbage. One of the ironies of all this is these are supposed to be a bunch of data guys who apparently cannot read public data spreadsheets. So what they are doing there, whether this is an intentional lie or just their own ignorance of how to read a spreadsheet, what they're referring to with some of those things are payments for subscription services with some of those outlets. They are reading the wrong figures. The Politico one is instructive. So Politico Pro is a subscription service that provides you not just the Politico news, but also a range of tools for tracking legislation on Capitol Hill and things like that. So lots of different institutions across the government subscribe to that. Just to kind of put in perspective how ridiculous this is, Lauren Boebert, who is a far-right member of Congress here in the U.S., she was attacking USAID over this yesterday and amplifying the lies from Elon Musk. And it turns out that, her office subscribes to Politico Pro as well. So, the very thing that she's attacking USAID for as a totally illegitimate cost that shows the corruption of USAID, it's actually something that it's a service that her office subscribes to too. So it just shows how these have no grounding in reality. There's no grounding here in sincerity or good faith. It really is just a fire hose of disinformation intended to kind of insinuate that there's something corrupt going on.
The other thing that came out of the White House this week, Jeremy, was this allegation that USAID is funding lots of transgender musicals and similar projects. Is that true?
Yeah, USAID is not funding transgender musicals. A couple things that are notable about that White House press release. None of the sources cited there, or almost none of the sources cited there, were in fact official government sources. They were secondhand news reports. As folks have dug into the backstory on some of those instances, most of those were not actually even funded by USAID. Some of them were actually funded by the State Department, which is the entity that that Rubio and Trump are saying and Musk are saying should absorb USAID. But I think the larger point here is if you actually go through and add up how much money that is, which I've done, it is a few $1 million. You know, they're talking about costs of 70,000 here, a few $100,000 there in that press release. The total budget of USAID in a given year is about $45 billion. Even if those were USAID programs, which they're not, the amounts of money there are a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the work that USAID does. So to torch the entire agency to the ground, which is what they are seeking to do, over a few little bits of money that they disagree with that had been launched in the prior administration, it just shows that this is driven not by fact, not by reality. It is driven by a senseless vendetta against foreign aid. And the larger story here is we have the richest man in the world deciding the richest country in the world should no longer keep helping some of the world's poorest people. And that is just senseless.
So let's talk about what is actually happening in the real world, Jeremy. There are reports today that clinical trials that are supported by USAID, even people that have received implants as a result of treatment through various programs, that has now all been brought to a grinding halt. They are no longer receiving medical care. What is the situation there?
So what the State Department did a couple of weeks ago was freeze all activity, all operations on all foreign assistance programming. So they put out a stop work order. And what that meant was everything stopped. So some of the things that stopped, the distribution of antiretroviral drugs to people living with HIV. If they go without those drugs for 3 to 4 weeks, their infections can resurge. They become infectious again, and they can transmit again, and of course get very, very sick again. Incredibly dangerous, and this threatens to roll back 2 decades worth of progress, bringing the global HIV epidemic under control. That's an insane risk to take. It's an insane risk to take over this kind of a disinformation vendetta. I read yesterday, Science Magazine had a report out that said that one of the things that was stopped by the stop work order was a phase 1 trial for a potential HIV vaccine that was just about to begin. So you think of the transformative potential for the entire world, including for a lot of people living with HIV in the United States or at risk of HIV in the United States. If we have forego the ability to potentially find a vaccine for HIV, again, an insane risk to take. In refugee camps and crisis zones all over the world, services are being shut down. I talked to one organization yesterday that is providing critical life-saving healthcare services in refugee and displacement settings across Darfur. They are beginning to wind down clinics that daily are providing safe delivery for pregnant mothers, that are providing life-saving nutrition treatment for children who will die if they lose access to that treatment, who are providing trauma care to people who've been injured in war, civilians injured in war. So it really is costing lives. There is just a total callousness, a willingness to accept death that is implicit in or explicit in how they are doing this, that it really just defies any sort of strategic or moral calculus.
Now, going back to those critiques from before, Jeremy, I've got a few more for you. Some say that only about 10% of USAID's money actually goes to people in need, that most of their money goes to influencing political causes. Does that ring true to you at all?
No, that's another strand of the disinformation campaign. So the 10% figure that Musk has cited that then got echoed very widely was a major mischaracterization of research that had been done by a group called Unlock Aid, which is an aid reform research group, an advocacy group. Unlock Aid, after Elon said this, put out their own document thoroughly debunking what he had said about their research, because he really mischaracterized what they said and now was using it to burn down the agency. The reality there, what they were saying was that about 10% of USAID's funding goes to groups that are ground that are what are called local. So they are run by or founded in the countries being served. Most of AID's money goes to international organizations. And so those are American NGOs or international NGOs or UN bodies. And I think that's a valid debate to have. I personally think that too much of USAID's money goes to international organizations and not enough goes to local organizations. And I work for an NGO. We don't take US government money as it happens, but we push very hard in our own advocacy for more money to go to local groups. The other thing that's insane about that claim, though, apart from just how much it mischaracterizes the actual research, is, of course, if you're concerned that not enough money is going direct to people and to groups on the front line, well, they're not trying to shift more of that money. They're trying to get rid of all of the money. What Elon Musk is trying to do is end USAID and end its budget, and that is what his counterpart in the State Department is trying to do as well. So that 10% goes to zero. It doesn't go to some higher proportion in the scenario that they're pushing for.
What's wrong with the idea of retaining the most worthwhile USAID programs under the control of the State Department, as Marco Rubio supposedly intends to do?
Well, a few things. First, USAID is already under the policy direction of the Secretary of State. That has been enshrined in law since 1998. Every administration since 1998 has held to that. Both of the administrations that I worked in and, of course, the first Trump administration all operated that way. And it worked very well, works very well. What you lose when you merge a development institution into a diplomatic institution is there is a lot of specific expertise that is unique to development. It is not the same as diplomacy. And we've seen this over and over and over when other countries, including Australia, have merged their development ministries into their foreign ministries. Their development missions and their development effectiveness and their aid effectiveness suffer. They lose technical expertise. They lose the ability to do effective program oversight, to do the kind of deep technical knowledge to ensure program effectiveness that you have when you have a dedicated development agency. In the same way that you wouldn't merge your diplomats into your Defense Department, you shouldn't merge your development experts into your diplomatic corps, because they are different skill sets, different areas of expertise, and different functions.
Finally, there's been so much misinformation about USAID over the last few days, and we've dealt with a bit of it so far, but what misinformation would you most like to correct?
Well, I think maybe the most egregious one is this claim about purchasing condoms for Gaza. So Elon Musk and then President Trump have put out and then consistently embellished this claim that $50 million worth of condoms were about to be shipped to Gaza, and they stopped it. When they have been asked, well, which money were you talking about? They then scramble, because there isn't actually a pot of money that looks like that. They have pointed to some pots of money, some grant funding that was going to support emergency field hospitals inside Gaza. But of course, that wasn't going to buy condoms. That was going to support the operations of an emergency field hospital that was not buying any condoms and was not providing contraceptive services. So there's no truth underneath that. But the other kind of tell there is that at the amount that USAID pays when it does purchase condoms for some of its other reproductive health and HIV programs, I looked this up because as I'm an aid guy, and so my immediate question was, gosh, I wonder how many condoms that would buy. Well, the U.S. can buy those, or USAID could buy those for about 5 cents a piece. So at that rate, that would be a billion with a B condoms. There is no world in which anyone was ever thinking about sending 1 billion condoms to Gaza. And when you think of it that way, it just underscores the absurdity of the claims they're making. So they are pushing a disinformation narrative completely unmoored from any factual reality.
Dr. Jeremy Konyndyk, thank you very much indeed for being with us on Planet America.
My pleasure. Thanks.
And that is all for this Planet America Weekend Update, and what a week it has been. We'll be back on Wednesday night on ABC TV at 9:40 or from 9 o'clock on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook.
And we'll be back here on ABC News next Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.